The most dangerous retirement advice in America is usually not a lie. It is a truth told too narrowly. That is what makes it dangerous. A lie is easier to fight. A half-truth spoken with confidence can ruin people for years. I have spent enough of my life around money to know that the sentence, "This is the best strategy," should make you lean back in your chair and ask a harder question. Best for whom? Best under what conditions? Best at the cost of what other risks? Best if life behaves nicely, or best if life behaves the way life usually behaves, which is unevenly, emotionally, and with very little respect for tidy models. That is the problem with the way people talk about Social Security. They say, wait until 70. They say it as though the sentence were finished, as though the matter had been settled, as though mathematics had already conquered biography, health, marriage, portfolio size, fear, taxes, and the simple fact that most households do not live inside a spreadsheet. Of course, waiting until 70 can be powerful. Of course, the monthly benefit is higher. Of course, the delayed credits are real. Of course, the larger survivor benefit matters. All of that is true, and still, I have seen too many good people damaged by taking one true number and promoting it into a complete philosophy that is not wisdom. That is simplification wearing a tie. The headline you gave me is a perfect example of this habit. 90% of Americans are supposedly skipping the number one piece of Social Security advice. That is a wonderful headline. It is also a slightly insulting one because it quietly implies that the public has been offered wisdom and is stubbornly refusing it. It frames the whole thing like a behavioral failure. The experts know, the people do not listen. The public is emotional. The professionals are rational. I do not trust this framing at all. Not because experts know nothing. Many know a great deal. I distrust it because it confuses a constraint problem with an intelligence problem. And that confusion is expensive. It flatters the people writing the advice and shames the people who have to live with its consequences. That is a bad combination. So I want to tell you how I think about this, not as a whiteboard exercise, not as a headline rebuttal, as a capital allocator, as someone who believes the question is never whether one lever looks attractive in isolation, but whether pulling that lever strengthens or weakens the whole machine. The machine matters. That is the sentence most people need and rarely hear. The machine matters. Your retirement is a machine. Your Social Security claiming age is one gear inside it. Your portfolio is another gear. Your spending needs are another. Your health is another. Your spouse is another. Your taxes are another. Your withdrawal rate is another. Your emotional tolerance for uncertainty is another. You do not get to optimize one gear and declare victory while the rest of the machine is grinding itself apart. That is not optimization. That is vanity. And vanity in retirement planning can be very costly because the mistakes are slow, polite, and difficult to reverse once habits harden. Now let us begin where the headlines begin, with the part that is true. If your full retirement age benefit is around $2,000 a month, taking Social Security at 62 may reduce that to something like $1,400. If you wait until age 70, it may rise to roughly $2,480 a month, sometimes a bit more or less depending on the exact numbers. That is a large jump, roughly 77% in the example. Given that is not noise, that is meaningful. It is an inflation, adjusted increase. It is backed by the government. It lasts for life. It can strengthen the floor beneath the rest of the plan. Fay Fallis Site Fay turn 67, file 0 Fay good, respect that. You should. A person who dismisses delayed claiming casually is usually being lazy. But here is the turn. A good feature is not the same thing as a universal answer. A larger monthly check later is one form of strength. A sustainable bridge to later is another. A lower draw on the portfolio now is another. A better sleep pattern is another. The right answer is not the largest visible number. It is the answer that lets the entire machine endure. That is a much more adult standard. The reason I have such little patience for oversimplified claiming advice is that it ignores the price of waiting. People hear bigger check at 70 and think only about what they gain later. They do not think enough about what must be spent, risked, or endured in order to get there. And that is where lives diverge. You do not arrive at 70 by teleportation. You have to live through 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, and 69. How? That is the question. What funds those years? Salary, part-time work, a large portfolio, a modest portfolio, a spouse, income, cash reserves, a pension, a disciplined withdrawal strategy, or plain strain, those years have to be financed somehow. If the financing is easy, then delay may be beautiful. If the financing is brutal, delay may be mathematically elegant and strategically stupid. That is the whole point. I want to linger here because this is where the public gets misled. When advisors or headlines say waiting until 70 is the smartest move, what many households hear is something moral. It sounds like patience is wisdom and early claiming is weakness. I do not think that is how serious people should think. There is nothing morally superior about starving one part of the machine to make another line item look larger. The only serious question is whether the later guarantee improves the household enough to justify the bridge required to reach it. That answer changes from person to person. So let us look at the real world data, because behavior always tells you something. If delaying to 70 were as universally right as the headlines make it sound, you would expect a very large share of the public to do it, but they do not. A significant share claim at 62, the earliest age. Many more claim between 63 and 65. A meaningful portion wait until full retirement age. Then only a small minority wait until 70, depending on the data set. It is less than 10%, and sometimes much less. Fay file a site, Fay turn 67, file 0 Fay now. You can interpret that in a snobbish way. You can say, well, most people simply do not understand the math. I do not find that explanation very persuasive. Some people surely do not understand the math. But when a pattern is that broad, I start looking for structure, not stupidity. Why are so few people waiting? Because many of them cannot or should not. That is the uncomfortable truth. A lot of retirement commentary is written as though retirees are all standing on the same patch of ground with the same toolkit. They are not. One person retires with $1.5 million. A spouse, decent health, and the ability to bridge 7 years without panic. Another retires with $350,000, some Social Security dependents, a body that is tired, and no real desire or ability to keep working. These two people are not solving the same problem. So why should they be handed the same sentence? That is the first intellectual failure in the headline. It mistakes one mathematically appealing option for a universal rule. I would rather tell the truth plainly. Delayed claiming can be a magnificent tool. It is not a commandment. The difference matters. Here is why. Suppose someone retires at 62 and needs $40,000 a year to live. Modest, not luxurious. A real number. Suppose the portfolio is $350,000. That person delays Social Security all the way to 70. Then for 8 years the entire $40,000 must come from the portfolio if there is no other income. That is roughly an 11 to 12% withdrawal rate. This is not just high, it is dangerous. It is dangerous precisely because it occurs at the front of retirement, the place where sequence of returns risk does the most damage. If markets fall early, those withdrawals lock in losses while the account is still large enough for the damage to matter. The person may arrive at 70 with a bigger Social Security check, yes, but with a portfolio badly cut down or even at serious risk of depletion. Fay file site, Fay turn 67, file 0 Fay. Now look at the other side. Suppose the same person claims around 62 and receives about $18,000 a year or $1,500 a month. Now the portfolio does not need to fund $40,000, it needs to fund roughly $22,000. That is still serious, but it is a very different strain from the first scenario. The withdrawal rate drops to something around 6%, still above the textbook comfort zone, but now potentially survivable with flexibility, discipline, and reasonable market help. More importantly, the portfolio is being protected from the giant early draw that could have maimed it. Fay file site, Fay turn 67, file 0 Fay. That is the sort of trade-off headlines hate. Because it refuses to make one variable the star. The bigger check later is not irrelevant. The protected portfolio now is not irrelevant either. Only a fool pretends otherwise. This is why I think the phrase delay, if you can afford to delay, is infinitely better than wait until 70. One is grown up advice, the other is a slogan, and slogans have no place in retirement. You are not building a campaign, you are building old age. Old age does not care whether the advice sounded elegant. Old age cares whether the machine keeps working. I want to say something else that people often miss because they are too fascinated by the bigger benefit. Number Social Security is not only about maximizing lifetime dollars. That is a worthy objective, but it is not the only one. The real functions of Social Security inside a retirement machine are more numerous. It can provide a guaranteed floor, It can reduce reliance on portfolio withdrawals. It can hedge longevity risk. It can support a surviving spouse. It can provide psychological stability during market stress. It can give permission to spend from risk assets more calmly because some baseline is already covered. All of those functions matter, but they do not all matter equally in every household. That is exactly why claiming age is contextual. If you are healthy, likely to live a long time, part of a couple, especially the higher earner, and able to fund the delay through salary or abundant assets. Delaying can be one of the most attractive tools in the plan. It increases the guaranteed floor exactly where longevity risk bites hardest. It strengthens the survivor benefit. It shifts some dependence away from market performance. In that kind of machine, delay is not merely a bigger check. It is a transfer from uncertain portfolio risk into certain later income. That is powerful. Fe Felicite, Fe turn 67, file 0 Fe, but if you are single in weaker health without a large bridge portfolio, and Social Security is not merely part of the plan, but one of the very things holding the plan together, then wait until 70 can become the kind of polished advice that feels wise in theory and destructive in practice. I do not admire theory that ignores implementation. If you cannot afford to implement the strategy, then it is not your strategy. That sentence should be written over the door of every retirement office in America. You cannot optimize what you cannot afford to live through. Now, let us talk about behavior, because this is one of the great silent forces in retirement planning, and almost every headline about Social Security ignores it. A plan is not good because it is elegant. A plan is good because a real person can actually inhabit it without falling apart. That matters. I have watched people do things on paper that were mathematically admirable and psychologically disastrous. They withdrew from portfolios too aggressively because the spreadsheet said the later guaranteed income would make everything worthwhile. Then the market dropped. Suddenly they were staring at a shrinking balance, telling themselves to stay disciplined, while every nerve in the body wanted immediate certainty. The person who might have lived more peacefully by claiming earlier and reducing strain now lives inside a theoretically optimal bridge that feels like a daily accusation. This matters more than the experts like to admit. Peace of mind is not sentimental fluff. Peace of mind is a real asset if it helps you stay with the rest of the plan. A person who sleeps better because some income begins now may behave better with the portfolio. Better behavior may outweigh a theoretically larger later benefit. I am not saying peace of mind always wins. I am saying it belongs in the calculation. A retirement strategy that cannot survive the retiree's own emotions is not as clever as it thinks it is. Again, the machine matters. The machine includes the human being. That is why I dislike the way some articles frame the issue. They imply that the right answer exists independent of the retiree's circumstances, psychology, or structure. It does not. And then there is health. This is where the arithmetic grows very unromantic very quickly. Claiming early gives you more checks, but smaller ones. Claiming later gives you fewer checks, but larger ones. There is a break-even point, often somewhere in the late 70s or early 80s, depending on the ages being compared. And the assumptions used: if you are highly likely to live well beyond that, waiting looks stronger. If you are less likely to reach that point, or if you have reasons to discount that probability, the logic changes. That is not pessimism. That is honest planning. Fe Felicite, Fe turn 67, file 0. Fe people hate putting mortality inside financial planning because mortality feels rude. Reality is rude. A financial plan that refuses to face life expectancy is not sophisticated. It is evasive. Now let me come to married households, because this is where the whole conversation becomes much more interesting and much more important. The higher earner in a married couple is not making a Social Security decision only for himself. He is making it for the surviving spouse as well. That is because the surviving spouse often keeps the larger of the two benefits. If the higher earner delays and locks in a larger benefit, that larger check may remain with the survivor later. This is a very serious and underappreciated reason why delayed claiming can be powerful in couples. It is not only about the couple while both are alive. It is about widowhood planning. That is real. It deserves respect. Fe Felicite, Fe turn 67, file 0 Fe, but even here, maturity means more than saying, therefore delay. Maturity asks how the household bridges to the chosen age. Can one spouse claim earlier while the higher earner waits? Does part Time work exists. Are there tax reasons to draw from certain accounts now and delay benefits? Is Medicare timing changing the shape of cash flow around 65? Can the household carry the strategy without turning the portfolio into kindling? These are the real questions, not what is the best claiming age, but what claiming sequence best serves this household's full machine. That is a much richer question, and once you ask it, you stop looking for one universal answer. You start designing. Retirement should be designed, not simplified. I also want to address the part of the source that mentions Medicare, because it points to something larger even if it does not stay on it long enough. The Social Security decision does not live alone. It sits beside Medicare decisions, tax planning, withdrawal sequencing, account location, Roth conversions, and all the other choices that make retirement a system rather than a slogan. This is exactly why I resist the article language so strongly. The article wants one move to be the story. Real retirement planning is never one move. It is the interaction of several moves. And once you see that, the proper attitude changes from certainty to integration. How does this claiming decision affect the amount drawn from taxable accounts? How does it affect Roth conversion windows? How does it alter required spending from the portfolio before age 70? How does it change survivor protection? How does it change stress? How does it alter the likelihood that the retiree panics during an early market drawdown? All of these things matter, all of them. I do not think of Social Security primarily as a maximization contest. I think of it as a lever. A lever must be pulled in the context of the machine it sits inside. A lever pulled beautifully in the wrong machine still fails. That is one reason I admire the work of the more serious researchers in this field. The best of them do not say everyone should wait. They say delayed claiming can increase safe withdrawal rates and improve portfolio longevity if the gap is funded sustainably. That last phrase matters, sustainably. If the gap can be funded from ongoing work, ample assets, or other low-stress resources, wonderful. If not, the exact same recommendation can work against the retiree Fay-Philo-Site Fay-Turn 67 File 0 Fay, that is the nuanced truth, but nuance travels poorly on television. So the public gets the simplified version and then feels guilty for not living in a household built to implement it. I do not like that. If a person with modest means hears all this and concludes, I guess I am one of the foolish 90% because I need the income now, that person has been mistreated by the framing. Needing income now is not foolish. Protecting a modest portfolio from being drained too early is not foolish. Choosing a strategy your life can support is not foolish. It may be exactly the right thing to do. I would rather see a modest household claim earlier and build a workable retirement than delay to satisfy a superior sounding rule and spend 8 years worrying whether the bridge is collapsing underneath them. Again, the machine matters. Again, the whole plan matters again. One beautiful variable can still produce an ugly life if it is being worshipped in isolation. Now let me tell you what I think the right question is. Not should everyone delay until 70? And not even what claiming age pays the most over my lifetime. The better question is this: what claiming choice gives my household the strongest combination of sustainability, peace of mind, survivor protection, and longevity support without putting intolerable pressure on the rest of the machine? That is the question. That is a serious question. That is a question worthy of retirement. And if you ask it honestly, you may still conclude that 70 is right, or you may conclude that 67 is right, or 65, or 62. And none of those answers is embarrassing if it fits the structure, honestly. That is what people need to hear more often. Retirement planning is not a moral contest. It is not a discipline Olympics. It is not a way to prove that you can withstand more discomfort in order to earn a more impressive monthly number later. It is a design problem. And the point of design is not to create the cleanest model. The point is to create a life that holds. So yes, respect the delayed credits. Respect the power of the larger check. Respect the survivor benefit. Respect the math. But do not bow to it blindly. Make it answer to the whole machine. Because the most expensive mistakes I have ever seen in retirement were not caused by people who could not do the arithmetic. They were caused by people who mistook one mathematically attractive answer for the whole truth. And the whole truth, as always, is larger, messier, and more human than the headline wants you to believe.